She didn't ask for help. She didn't even look up when the rain started to fall harder. But he saw her standing alone on the side of the road, soaked, exhausted, and carrying more than just the weight of her duffel bag. He was a single dad on his way home. She was a soldier with nowhere left to go. Neither of them knew that a simple act of kindness would unlock a story neither could forget. And that one quiet knock would change everything. If you believe in second chances and quiet moments that lead to something bigger, and in the kind of love that heals more than just hearts, make sure to subscribe. These are the stories that remind us what really matters. Now, let me take you back to the day it all began. The rain began with a whisper. Soft at first, like fingers tapping gently against the windshield of Ben Callahan's old Ford pickup. But within minutes, it turned fierce. An Oregon downpour, relentless and icy, sweeping across the dark country road, like nature had something to say and wasn't taking no for an answer. Ben leaned forward, squinting through the wipers as they worked double time to keep the windshield clear. His hands, rough and calloused from years of carpentry, gripped the steering wheel as he glanced at the boy in the passenger seat. "Everything okay, bud?" he asked, his voice low, steady. Wyatt, 9 years old, pale blonde hair sticking slightly to his temple, nodded, but didn't look up from his book. "Just wondering if we'll make it home before dinner gets cold." Ben offered a tired half smile. "If this rain doesn't wash us off the road, we'll be fine." They were just outside Maple Hollow, a small timber town that had more dogs than traffic lights, nestled between pine-covered hills and wrapped in a misty quiet that both calmed and haunted Ben since his wife passed 4 years ago. Every corner still smelled like her. Every dinner was a memory. Every night was too long. But tonight wasn't about grief. Tonight was just about getting home. Until he saw the figure on the side of the road. At first it looked like a mailbox or a tree stump. But then lightning flashed sharp and sudden, and Ben saw her clearly. A woman, standing alone. Head down, military duffel bag at her feet, soaked to the bone in fatigues. Her dark hair clung to her neck like vines. One hand tried futilely to shield her eyes from the downpour, while the other gripped her phone held out like a lifeline to nothing. Ben's foot was on the brake before he even registered the thought. The truck skidded slightly on the slick road before stopping just a few feet ahead of her. Dad Wyatt said, eyes wide now, "She's a soldier." Ben didn't answer. He was already out the door. Rain lashed at him as he jogged back toward her boots, slapping mud. Up close, he saw exhaustion etched into her features, her skin pale under the street lamp's flicker, her shoulders slumped with weight that had nothing to do with the bag she carried. "You okay?" he called out over the storm. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were sharp, military. Sharp, but tired. Guarded. "I'm fine. You don't look fine." "I've got roadside assistance," she said, quickly raising the phone. "Just waiting." Ben nodded, but then he saw the flicker of frustration in her eyes, the way her thumb hovered hesitantly over the screen. "No signal out here," he said softly. She hesitated. "Figures." "Come on. My kid's in the truck. We're 5 minutes from town. I can give you a place to dry off and warm up until someone gets here." Her jaw clenched. Ben recognized the hesitation, pride, fear, stubbornness, but also exhaustion. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "I'm not offering charity," Ben said simply. "Just kindness. There's a difference." For a second, she stood frozen. Then her shoulders sagged, and she picked up her bag. "Okay, just for a bit." Ben took her duffel and led her to the truck. Wyatt scooted to the side without a word, watching her with quiet curiosity. "Tessa," she said finally. "Tessa Rourke, Ben Callahan, and that's Wyatt." Wyatt gave a small, respectful nod the way he'd been taught when meeting someone new, especially someone in uniform, They drove in silence for a while, the rain hammering against the roof like a drumbeat. Ben stole glances at her, her face unreadable jaw, tight eyes darting occasionally to the boy. She didn't speak. He didn't press. When they reached his small, cedar-shingled cabin tucked at the edge of the woods, Ben parked and turned off the engine. "It's not much," he said as they stepped out. "But it's warm, dry, and the roof holds." Inside the cabin smelled of pine and something faintly sweet, maybe vanilla, maybe firewood. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner. Wyatt kicked off his boots and disappeared into his room. Tessa stood in the doorway, dripping, unsure of her place. Ben handed her a towel and pointed to the bathroom. Fresh clothes in the basket. Might be a bit big, but they're clean. She hesitated again. That same pause, like stepping into someone else's world, was harder than she could explain. 10 minutes later, she returned in one of Ben's flannel shirts and a pair of loose sweatpants, her damp hair tied back. She looked softer, younger somehow, but her eyes still carried years. The rest of her hadn't lived yet. Ben handed her a steaming mug. "Coffee." She took it without speaking. They sat in silence for a long while, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the crackle of wood burning. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you." For the coffee, he asked, one eyebrow raised. For stopping. Ben shrugged. Didn't feel like a choice. That's what makes it matter. The storm continued outside, wind howling through the trees, like ghosts not quite ready to leave. But inside, something fragile and human had begun. Not romance, not hope, just warmth. The kind that doesn't ask questions, the kind that stays. And for Tessa Rourke, it had been a long time since anything stayed. Tessa hadn't planned on stopping. She had no plan, really. Just a borrowed car with a broken GPS, a duffel bag of clothes, and a map folded so many times it had started to tear at the creases. The town of Maple Hollow wasn't even on her original route. She was supposed to head straight north, visit Jared's grave at the military cemetery in Olympia, and keep moving. No attachments, no conversations. Just one last goodbye, and then silence. But the storm had changed that, and so had Ben Callahan. Now she sat cross-legged on a worn leather couch that creaked when she shifted, wrapped in a plaid blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and detergent. The fire crackled softly in the stove nearby. Warmth soaked into her bones, like sunlight she hadn't felt in years. Across the room, Ben was in the kitchen, humming a song she couldn't quite place, some old folk tune, slow and gentle. He moved with the quiet ease of someone who had long since accepted solitude, yet hadn't let it harden him. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows as he prepared something on the stove. "You hungry?" he asked without turning. Tessa considered lying. Pride was a reflex she hadn't yet unlearned. A little, she admitted. "I make a mean grilled cheese," he said. Wyatt's favorite. As if summoned, the boy appeared in the doorway, his socked feet nearly silent against the wooden floor. He held a battered comic book in one hand and looked at Tessa like she was part alien, part superhero. "Did you really sleep in the desert?" he asked. Tessa blinked. "Yeah, a few times. Did you have a gun sometimes?" He grinned wide. "Cool." Ben gave him a look. "Manners, Wyatt." The boy held up his hands, mock innocent. "I was just asking." Tessa chuckled. It caught her off guard, the sound of her own laughter, rusty from lack of use. She hadn't laughed since. She couldn't remember when. Dinner was simple grilled cheese with tomato soup, eaten at a round wooden table with uneven legs. Wyatt talked most of the time, asking questions only a child could get away with. Had she ever jumped out of a plane? What was the scariest thing she'd ever seen? Did she know karate? Tessa answered some deflected others. But through it all, Ben watched. Not prying, not judging, just observing. And when their eyes met, there was no awkwardness. only understanding. After dinner, Wyatt excused himself to do homework, a concept Tessa was surprised he followed voluntarily. Ben returned to the sink, washing dishes without fuss. "I can help Tessa," offered, already standing. "I've got it." She didn't sit. Instead, she wandered to the window. The rain had slowed, reduced to a soft drizzle. Through the glass, the pine trees stood still and dark, like silent guardians. "It's quiet here," she said softly. "Too quiet?" Ben asked. "No, just different." He dried his hands and leaned against the counter. "You from a city, military bases mostly. Then DC for a while." Ben nodded. "That explains the posture." She smirked. "Old habits." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just full. Like both of them were weighing how much to reveal. "I was a logistics officer," she said finally. 9 years, 2 tours abroad. I got out 3 weeks ago. He didn't respond right away, just nodded again. "I lost someone over there," she added. "That's why I was out driving. I was on my way to his grave." Ben's voice was low. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I keep thinking if I just stand there, stand where they buried him, something will make sense again." Ben didn't move, didn't try to offer some fix-it phrase. Instead, he said, "Sometimes we don't find answers at graves, just silence." Tessa turned to him, surprised by the clarity of that. "You've lost someone." "My wife. Cancer. 4 years ago." It was said plainly, without drama, like a truth he'd lived with long enough to accept, but not forget. "I'm sorry," she echoed. He gave a tired smile. "Me too." The room fell into a gentle hush after that. Outside, the last of the rain dripped from the eaves. Inside, the fire dimmed slightly, casting soft amber shadows across the walls. Ben motioned toward the couch. "You're welcome to stay the night again. That old car of yours probably needs more than duct tape." Tessa didn't argue. She didn't want to sleep in the car, didn't want to go back to driving aimlessly. She just wanted for one night to feel like the world wasn't broken. "Thanks," she said quietly. She lay awake for a long time that night. The cabin creaked with the wind. Somewhere down the hallway, Wyatt whispered the words of a bedtime story to himself. And in the living room, Tessa stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of a home that wasn't hers, but didn't feel foreign. Her fingers reached into the side pocket of her duffel. She pulled out a folded letter, the one she hadn't dared open since the day it arrived. Jared's handwriting stared back at her, still sealed. She placed it under her pillow, shut her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, dreamed of something that didn't end in goodbye. Morning came quietly. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the cabin, curling around the wooden beams and softening the dawn with a kind of domestic intimacy that felt almost foreign to Tessa. She stirred beneath the warm blanket, momentarily unsure of where she was. Then the soft groan of floorboards reminded her. Maple Hollow. The cabin. Ben. She sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes. The folded letter beneath her pillow was still there, unopened. She slipped it back into her duffel bag with a kind of reverence, as if it might explode if handled too roughly. From the kitchen, the faint clatter of plates and the hiss of bacon in a pan stirred the quiet. She followed the scent, barefoot and cautious, as if walking through someone else's dream. Ben was at the stove again, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and flannel pajama pants. His longish hair was still damp from a shower swept back from his face. There was a calm to him that felt earned, not accidental. "You're up early," he said, without turning. "Smelled the coffee," Tessa replied, hugging her arms across her chest. "There's a clean mug in the cabinet, left side." She poured herself a cup, then leaned against the counter watching him. "I can't remember the last time I woke up to someone cooking breakfast who didn't wear combat boots." Ben chuckled. "You're lucky. Wyatt doesn't trust me with pancakes. Says I flipped them too soon. As if on cue, Wyatt padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks and a hoodie 3 sizes too big. He grunted his way to the table and laid his head on his arms, as if the effort of waking up was more than any 9-year-old should have to endure. Ben slid a plate in front of him. "Fuel up, soldier." Wyatt cracked an eye and grinned at Tessa. "You staying for breakfast?" She hesitated. Technically, she should have been on the road by now. She'd told herself one night. Just one. But something about the crackle of the stove, the smell of bacon, and the way Ben moved through his morning without expectation made it hard to walk away. "I guess I could stay long enough to eat," she said. Wyatt gave her a sleepy thumbs up. They ate in near silence, broken only by the occasional slurp of juice or clink of a fork. Tessa studied the details, the fraying edges of the tablecloth, the way Wyatt hummed to himself when chewing the calendar on the fridge, marked with hand-drawn stars. A home. Imperfect, but real. After breakfast, Ben began packing Wyatt's school lunch. Tessa reached for the extra sandwich on the counter, instinctively helping. "PB&J," she asked. Classic Ben replied. She wrapped it in wax paper, folded the edges with practiced precision. "You have kids in your family?" he asked gently. "No," she said. "But I used to make sandwiches like this for someone." The pause hung between them like breath on cold glass. She didn't elaborate, and Ben didn't push. Wyatt grabbed his backpack and slipped into his boots. "You want to ride to town?" Ben asked her. Tessa hesitated, then nodded. That'd be great. They dropped Wyatt at school, a low single-story brick building with bright murals and a flag flapping lazily in the wind. As he ran up the walkway, he turned and waved at Tessa. She waved back. Ben didn't say anything until they were halfway back down the road. "You got plans today?" I was going to get the car towed. Figure out the next leg. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "You're not in a hurry." It wasn't a question. "No," she admitted. "But I feel like I should be." Why, Tessa looked out the window. The pine trees blurred past, tall and silent. "Because if I stay still too long, I start to feel unfinished." Ben nodded like he understood. Sometimes unfinished is exactly where the healing starts. They rode in silence the rest of the way. Back at the cabin, Tessa stepped out into the sunlight. It was the first clear morning in days. The world felt washed clean. She wandered to the backyard, where an old wooden swing hung from a low tree branch. It creaked as she sat, swaying slowly. The view was breathtaking hills rolling into misty valleys, a horizon that looked like it had never known war. Ben appeared with 2 mugs of coffee. "Second cup's always better outside," he said, handing her one. She accepted it, grateful. They didn't speak for a long while. Then she broke the quiet. "He was 29, she said. "Jared. We served together for 3 years. I was with him the day before he left." Ben nodded, eyes soft. "I told myself I'd go see his grave. That if I could stand there, maybe I'd feel something that made sense. But every time I try, it feels further away." Ben stared into the trees. "Maybe you're not supposed to find answers there. Maybe the answers find you, when you let yourself stop running." Tessa turned to him. "Is that what happened to you?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet. But maybe you showing up is step 1. She looked away, unsure what to say to that. Inside, a cardinal landed on the porch, railing bright red against the wood. Tessa watched it for a long time. "I might stay 1 more night," she said softly. Ben didn't smile. He didn't move. But something in his posture relaxed. "No pressure," he said. "But if you're still here by dinner, there'll be lasagna." She chuckled. "You cook a lot for someone who lives alone." Ben sipped his coffee. "I cook in case someone stops by." This time she smiled. It was small but real. And for the first time in a long, long while, Tessa Rourke didn't feel like a visitor. She felt kept. The lasagna was excellent. It shouldn't have surprised her. Ben had proven himself to be a quiet magician in the kitchen, but the richness of the sauce and the perfectly golden crust caught Tessa off guard. She hadn't tasted a real home-cooked meal in months, and this one did something strange. It lingered not just on her tongue, but somewhere deeper, somewhere hollow she hadn't dared name. Wyatt inhaled his food like a growing boy should, while Ben ate slowly, glancing up every so often, as if checking to make sure she was still there, still okay. The unspoken question hung in the room. "Are you staying?" She didn't know the answer yet. After dinner, Wyatt asked if he could watch a movie. Ben agreed, but with a deal. 1 hour. Then book, then bed. The boys scampered off, leaving the two adults to wash dishes in companionable quiet. Tessa stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands sunk in sudsy water. Ben dried the plates beside her movements, unhurried. "You always eat like that?" she asked. "Like what? Like you're afraid the food's going to disappear." Ben smiled. Old habit. There were days after Megan passed. Food was just a reason to stand up. You eat because it gives you something to do between getting out of bed and going back to it. She paused, her hands motionless under the water. "I know that feeling," she said softly. Ben glanced at her. "Tell me about him." She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't want to, but because her throat felt full. Jared wasn't perfect, she began. He told bad jokes, hated vegetables, snored like an engine. But he made me feel like I wasn't just a soldier, like I was a woman, a person. Ben nodded, drying a fork. "We made plans," she continued. "After the tour, a cabin in Vermont, maybe kids, a dog. We talked about making a life out of something more than orders and uniforms." She turned off the tap, dried her hands on a towel. "Then one day he volunteered for a patrol I should have led. Said I needed rest. 12 hours later, they brought his tags back in a plastic bag. The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter. I got the letter 3 days later," she said. "His last letter. But I've never opened it." Ben didn't speak. He didn't try to fill the silence. He simply looked at her, steady and unflinching, as if saying, "You're allowed to break here." "I'll hold the pieces." Tessa looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. "I thought if I just kept moving, the grief wouldn't catch up. But it does. It always does." Ben set the dish towel down and leaned against the counter beside her. What if it's not about outrunning it? What then? What if healing isn't about leaving the pain behind, but letting it sit next to you without crushing you? She stared at him. "Did you come up with that? Or read it off a coffee mug?" she asked. Ben laughed, the sound low and warm. "I've had years to think, and a lot of coffee." They both smiled, and for a moment the tension in the room loosened, like a rope slowly untangling. Later that night, Tessa stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars blink to life one by one. The air was cool, pine-scented, and thick with the kind of silence only found in the woods. The door creaked behind her. Ben stepped out holding 2 mugs. "Chamomile," he said. "No pressure." She took the mug, grateful. They stood side by side, not touching, not speaking, just breathing in rhythm with the night. "You know what's funny," she said after a while. "What I never wanted to be saved. I just wanted to feel seen." Ben nodded slowly. "And now?" She looked at him. Really looked. "I think I want to be still. Just for a while." He didn't answer, but something shifted in his posture. Approval, maybe. Relief. Inside, Wyatt's movie had ended. His footsteps padded across the floor as he called out, "Good night." "Night, buddy," Ben replied. Tessa called softly, "Sleep tight." She heard a pause, then the boy's voice again. "You too." "Miss Tessa." It hit her unexpectedly. That name, that tone, that place in someone's life, however small. A guest, a presence, a voice worth remembering. That night, sleep came slower. Tessa lay curled on the couch, Jared's letter once again beneath her pillow. Her fingers hovered over it, tracing the seal, feeling the fragile weight of words she still wasn't ready to hear. But something had changed. The hollow in her chest still ached, but now it echoed with more than pain. It echoed with laughter from dinner, with Wyatt's innocent questions, with Ben's quiet strength, with belonging. Maybe grief didn't disappear. Maybe it just made room for other things. Hope, kindness, a second chance. And maybe this little cabin in Maple Hollow wasn't a detour. Maybe it was the beginning. It was the sound of rain that woke her again. Not the storm kind, just the steady, rhythmic kind that makes the trees sway and the earth breathe deeper. The kind that made everything feel slow and suspended, like time had paused to catch its breath. Tessa sat up on the couch, disoriented for a moment, before the familiar scent of pine and coffee reminded her where she was. She rubbed her eyes and looked around. The fire had long since gone out, but someone, Ben, probably had, laid an extra quilt over her during the night. She stood stretching the tightness from her limbs and padded toward the kitchen. A note waited for her on the counter in neat, deliberate handwriting. Took Wyatt to town. Be back by lunch. If you're bored, the key to the shed's hanging by the back door. B. The shed curiosity tugged at her like an old instinct. She found the key where he said it would be and stepped outside. The shed sat just beyond the tree line, an old, weathered structure with moss creeping up the sides and ivy curling around the window frames. She'd noticed it before, but assumed it was full of tools or firewood. The key slid into the rusted lock with a satisfying click. The door creaked open to a scent of cedar dust and something faintly nostalgic, like childhood or memory. Inside there was no clutter, no tools, just a single object under a beige canvas sheet. Tessa walked forward slowly and peeled the cover back. A piano, an upright, slightly battered but lovingly preserved. Its black and white keys were dulled from use, and a small crack ran along the lacquered edge. But it was beautiful. And it was tuned. She sat down instinctively, running her fingers along the keys. Without thinking, she played. Not a song with words or purpose, just sound. Notes that rose from her fingertips like breath. The first chords were hesitant, awkward, but then her muscle memory took over, and something ancient unfurled inside her music. She hadn't touched since before Jared, before Iraq, before she learned to fold her feelings into a uniform and leave them behind. Ben heard the piano before he saw her. He'd pulled into the driveway, groceries in the back, Wyatt already halfway out of the truck, when that melody drifted across the yard, soft, wistful, full of ache and something else. Something like grace. He stopped walking. Wyatt turned. Dad Ben held up a hand. "Go inside, bud. I'll be there in a minute." He walked to the shed, each step slower than the last. When he reached the door, he didn't open it. Just leaned against the frame and listened. It was a song he hadn't heard in years. Not that specific tune, but the feeling it carried. The kind his late wife Megan used to play on quiet mornings when the world was still waking up. It wasn't the notes that choked him, it was the stillness they created. Inside, Tessa was lost in the music. Eyes closed, shoulders, relaxed face. Soft with something resembling peace. When she finally finished, she let her fingers linger on the keys. Ben knocked lightly. She turned, startled. "I didn't mean to," she began. He stepped inside, shaking his head. "Don't apologize. I didn't even know it still worked." "You don't play. I used to," he said. Megan did more. After she passed, I just closed the door. Tessa looked back at the piano. "It's beautiful. He said quietly, then cleared his throat. The piano, too. There was a silence between them, but it didn't feel empty. I haven't played since college, she said. Before the army. Jared taught me a few songs, but I stopped when he... You know. Ben nodded. You and Meg and Tessa said carefully. Were you together long high school sweethearts, married at 23, diagnosed at 34, gone by 36? Tessa looked down. I'm sorry. Ben gave a small smile. People say that a lot. But I think what they really mean is, I don't know what to say to that kind of loss. And it's okay. I didn't know either. She folded her hands in her lap. Do you still miss her every day? He said without hesitation. But not the way I used to. Not with that sharp, suffocating ache. Now it's more like remembering a favorite song. It hurts, but it also reminds me I had something worth losing. Tessa felt her chest tighten. I've been afraid to remember, she admitted. Afraid if I start, I won't be able to stop. Ben's eyes were kind. That's the thing about memory. It doesn't ask for permission. It shows up anyway. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter, still sealed. The envelope slightly worn, the handwriting unmistakable. I still haven't opened it, she whispered. Ben didn't move. I brought it here to read, at his grave. But I couldn't. And now, I'm scared of what Ben asked gently, that it will end things, that once I read it, he'll really be gone. Ben stepped forward, his voice a hush. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe what he wrote will bring part of him back. Tessa looked at the letter, fingers trembling. I'm not ready. That's okay, Ben said. No one's counting. She looked up at him. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't giving her a deadline or a destination. He was just here. For the first time since Jared's death, Tessa felt something loosen inside her. A knot she'd been clutching so tightly she hadn't realized it was strangling her spirit. She stood, placed the letter back in her pocket, and looked at the piano. Will you play something, she asked. Ben gave a shy smile. It's been years. Then it's about time. He sat beside her, cracked his knuckles, and after a long breath pressed the first key. The sound was clumsy at first, but then it found its rhythm. Side by side, they played chords, blending hearts, unfolding not to perform, not to impress, but simply to remember that something beautiful could still come from hands that had held grief too long. And outside, the rain kept falling soft as forgiveness. It happened on a Tuesday. There was no storm this time, no dramatic skies or rolling thunder. Just a quiet morning, cool and gray with fog hanging low over the trees and dew clinging to the wild grass behind the cabin. Tessa hadn't slept well. Dreams came in flickers, faces from war. Jared's laugh, a sudden silence. She woke before dawn, heart racing, unsure if the dream was memory or regret. She brewed coffee and stood at the back porch, barefoot, watching the mist curl through the trees. The letter sat heavy in the pocket of her hoodie, as it had every day. Today felt different. Inside, Ben stirred early, too. He found her outside already on her second cup of coffee. You're up, he said softly. I couldn't sleep. He stood beside her, sipping from his own mug. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Tessa said, I think I'm ready. Ben didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded and quietly walked inside, giving her the space she hadn't needed to ask for. She returned to the piano shed. It felt like the only place where she could open something sacred. The letter was still sealed, but slightly worn from her constant handling edges, bent a faint smudge where her thumb always rested. Jared's handwriting across the front was bold and steady, her name underlined once. Tessa. She sat down at the piano bench, staring at the envelope for a long time, before sliding her finger beneath the flap. The paper tore softly. She unfolded the letter with the kind of care reserved for holy things. His voice returned the moment she saw the first line. Tess, if you're reading this, it means the thing I was afraid of happened. And I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. Not for what I did because I volunteered, you know that. I've never been good at sitting still when someone else could be in danger. You know me, always running toward the fire. But I'm sorry for what this will do to you. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I did. Because I believed in the kind of world where your smile still exists. There are things I never said. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I thought we had time. But you need to know this. You changed me. You made me believe there could be more than uniforms and duty. You made me believe in home. If you're reading this, you're standing somewhere in the world we never got to build together. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you're broken. But Tess, please don't let grief be the last thing I gave you. Please live. Laugh. Be loved. Find that cabin, build a fire, teach a kid how to throw a baseball kiss, someone under a thunderstorm. You're still here. That means there's more ahead for you. Please don't let your heart die with mine. And if you ever hear someone play the piano, really play. Think of me. I'll be there. Always. With everything I ever had, Jared. Tessa didn't cry right away. She read the letter again. And again. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept reading. She needed every word to carve its way into her heart, needed the message to settle somewhere deeper than pain. When the tears came, they were not loud. They fell slowly like spring rain, gentle, steady, and long overdue. The grief didn't vanish, but something inside her shifted. The guilt she'd carried, the questions she never asked, all of it, seemed to lift a little, as if Jared's words had reached through the veil of absence and wrapped around her one last time. He hadn't written to say goodbye. He had written to send her forward. Later, when she walked back into the cabin, her face was pale and her eyes rimmed with salt. But her steps were steady, her spine straighter. Ben looked up from the couch. He didn't speak, just watched her carefully. Tessa held the letter in her hands. He told me to live. Ben stood slowly. Then I hope you listen to him. She smiled softly. I think I finally can. There was a knock at the door. Tessa blinked. Ben looked confused. Wyatt ran from the hallway and opened the front door without hesitation. Miss Tessa, he said. You got mail. The boy handed her a small manila envelope with an army seal on the top left corner. She frowned, heart skipping slightly. Ben leaned closer. More military stuff. Tessa opened it. Inside was a certificate, a letter of honorable discharge, and a second note with handwritten initials at the bottom. She read it silently. Her brows lifted slightly. They're offering me a civilian role, stateside, logistics training coordinator, part-time. I'd be working with veterans transitioning out of service. Ben raised an eyebrow. And where would that be? She glanced up, surprised. Here. This county. Wyatt, who had wandered off to get juice, poked his head back in. That means you'd stay. Tessa looked at him. Then at Ben. She didn't answer right away. I'm not sure, she said softly. Ben didn't look disappointed, just thoughtful. I think it'd be good, he said. For them. For you. For Wyatt. For you, she asked. Ben shrugged. Maybe. She folded the letter and tucked it away. That night she played the piano again. And when Ben joined her halfway through, she didn't stop. For the first time since Jared died, she wasn't surviving. She was beginning. It was the kind of evening that wrapped itself in gold. The sun filtered through the trees in slanted lines, casting a warm glow across the cabin porch, where Tessa sat, her knees pulled to her chest, a glass of lemonade sweating on the armrest. Inside, Wyatt was humming to himself, building something elaborate with Legos. Ben was in the kitchen quietly cooking something that smelled like rosemary and garlic. It had been 4 days since she opened Jared's letter. 4 days of unexpected peace. She hadn't made a decision yet about the job offer. Every time she looked at the envelope, she saw possibility, but also fear. After all this time, staying felt like the braver choice. But bravery, she'd learned, wasn't always about combat. Sometimes, it was about daring to build something again, piece by piece. The sun dipped lower. Tessa stood and stretched the wooden floor of the porch, warm under her feet. Inside, Ben was chopping vegetables, his sleeves rolled up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He looked content, settled. There was something magnetic about the way he moved quietly, capable like someone who didn't speak unless it mattered. Then there was a knock, 3 sharp raps at the front door, not hesitant, not neighborly, firm. Tessa and Ben both froze. Wyatt paused mid-hum. Ben wiped his hands on a dish towel, glanced at Tessa, and walked to the door. He opened it slowly, cautiously. Standing on the porch was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pressed blazer, her blonde-gray hair pinned neatly. Her eyes were sharp alert, and she held a thin leather briefcase against her side. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked. Ben nodded. "Yes, I'm Marian Doyle, from Child and Family Services. I'm here regarding Wyatt." The silence in the room turned from still to electric. Tessa stepped forward instinctively, placing herself slightly beside Wyatt, who had emerged from the hallway, confusion on his face. Ben's voice remained calm, but there was tension behind it. "What about him?" "There's been a petition filed by your wife's parents," Marian said, her tone professional, but not unkind. "They're requesting a formal review of Wyatt's custodial arrangement." Ben's jaw tightened. "They haven't spoken to us in over 2 years, I understand," Marian said. "But they've submitted a concern regarding Wyatt's welfare. It's standard procedure to conduct an in-home assessment when a formal inquiry is raised." Tessa's pulse quickened. What kind of concern? Marian opened her folder. Allegations of emotional neglect, lack of academic support, social isolation. Tessa almost laughed. It was absurd. Wyatt was one of the most emotionally attuned kids she'd ever met. Ben's voice was low, controlled. They were against the homeschooling, said it would make him weird. Megan and I agreed to teach him ourselves. He's thriving. "I'm not here to make any assumptions," Mr. Callahan, Marian said. "Just to observe. I'll need to speak with Wyatt, review his routine, and take notes on the home environment." Ben stood still for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're welcome to come in." Marian smiled, slightly professional and efficient. She stepped inside and immediately began taking notes. Wyatt looked at his father, then at Tessa, uncertain. "It's okay," Ben said softly. "She just wants to ask you a few things. Be honest." Tessa watched as Marian sat with Wyatt at the kitchen table, asking him about his day, his hobbies, his school routine. He answered clearly, politely. Tessa could tell he was nervous. He picked at the edge of his shirt, a habit she'd noticed when he was unsure. Marian finished her notes after 20 minutes and stood. "I'll file my preliminary report within the week. In the meantime, I suggest you speak to a family attorney. If this becomes a custody hearing, you'll want counsel." Ben walked her to the door. As she stepped outside, she turned. "This isn't unusual, Mr. Callahan. Grandparents sometimes feel powerless after a loss. It doesn't mean anything's wrong, but you should be prepared." Then she was gone. The door clicked shut. The room felt like it had lost air. Tessa turned to Ben. "They want to take him from you?" Ben didn't answer. He stared at the door as if trying to see through it. "Ben," his voice when it came was raw. "Megan's parents never forgave me. They blamed me for pulling her off chemo. Said I gave up. But she asked me. She was tired. She wanted peace. I respected that. Tessa's heart twisted. You did what she wanted. They don't care, he said. They just want control. They never even met Wyatt after she passed. Wyatt looked up from the table, his eyes large. Am I in trouble? Ben crossed the room and knelt beside him. No, buddy. You're not. And no one's taking you away. But what if they try? Ben looked at his son, and for the first time since Tessa met him, his calm cracked. They can try, he said, but they'll have to go through me. Tessa's hand found Ben's shoulder. He didn't flinch. They're not going to win, she said quietly. Not if I can help it. He looked up at her. For a long moment he didn't say a word. But something unspoken passed between them, something stronger than fear, older than grief. Trust. The knock that had come wasn't just on the door. It had struck something deep in Ben's past. His guilt, his grief, his fragile sense of peace. But it had also done something else. It had drawn Tessa closer. That night after Wyatt was asleep, Tessa found Ben in the shed, staring at the piano but not touching it. They'll push, he said softly. Harder than I expect. They always have money. Lawyers. She stepped beside him. You're not alone this time. Ben turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. You think I'm a good father. Tessa didn't hesitate. I think you're the best kind. The moonlight caught the edge of his jaw, his eyes shimmering. Neither of them moved. Not yet. But something had already begun. Not just the fight to keep a family together, but the slow, fragile beginning of something that looked a lot like love. The scent of roasted chicken filled the cabin like a quiet promise. It was Tessa's idea. After the knock, after the social worker, after Ben's mask of control had finally cracked for a few short, vulnerable seconds, she'd wanted to do something, anything that didn't involve paperwork, fear, or waiting. So she cooked. Not the kind of fast, field-ready meals she'd grown used to. Tessa cooked slowly, carefully. With rosemary clipped from Ben's garden garlic, she found braided in the pantry, and butter she insisted on browning before basting. Ben had watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms folded, not interfering, just observing. She moved through his kitchen like she belonged there, as if the space had been waiting for her shape to fill it. Wyatt, she called, wiping her hands on a towel. Set the table. The boy popped his head in from the hallway, face still flushed from playing in the yard. Are we having guests? No, she said. We're just going to make tonight feel special. He grinned and ran to the drawer with the silverware. Special sounds good, Ben chuckled. He's not used to that word, and dinner going together. Tessa winked. Then it's about time we start changing that. When the table was set and the food steaming, they sat, not just to eat, but to pause, to breathe, to be. The wooden chairs creaked. The rain tapped lightly at the windows again. Somewhere deep in the forest, a loon called. The world slowed down. Should we say grace? Wyatt asked. Ben looked surprised. We haven't done that in a while. Tessa smiled gently. You go ahead. Wyatt bowed his head and whispered something too soft for either of them to catch. Then he looked up, cheeks slightly pink. Just said thanks, he explained. For you guys? For dinner. Ben ruffled his hair. That's a pretty solid prayer. They ate. Conversation came naturally. Wyatt talked about his Lego spaceship, which now had working defense shields thanks to duct tape and a bottle cap. Tessa told a story about a mess hall in Kuwait that accidentally served ice cream made of mashed potatoes. Ben added one about a raccoon that once broke into his cabin and got drunk off fermenting apples. There was laughter. Real laughter. the kind that sticks to the walls and lingers after everyone's gone to bed. When the plates were empty and only a few bites of chicken remained, Tessa stood to clear the dishes. Ben stopped her with a look. "You cooked," he said. "We clean." Tessa hesitated, then sat back down, folding her hands in her lap, watching them. Ben and Wyatt moved in practiced sync. Ben rinsing Wyatt, drying their rhythm almost musical. It was a glimpse into the life they had built, simple, functional, full of unspoken care. And she was here now. Part of it, after everything, after Jared, after the grief, after the military and the chaos and the noise, Tessa had stepped into something she hadn't known she was looking for. A family. When the kitchen was quiet again, Ben poured 3 cups of tea and brought them to the table. They sat in a triangle, hands wrapped around warm ceramic, the silence between them, not heavy, but whole. About the job, Tessa said, breaking the quiet. Ben didn't look up, but Wyatt did. "I haven't said yes yet," she continued. "I've been thinking." Ben raised his eyes slowly. "And I'm not just thinking about the job. I'm thinking about what comes with it, about what staying here would really mean." Ben said nothing. He didn't push. So she added, "I'm thinking. Maybe home doesn't have to be something you build from scratch. Maybe sometimes it's something waiting to be accepted." Wyatt blinked. "Does that mean you'll stay?" Tessa turned to him. "I'm still deciding. But if I did, would that be okay?" Wyatt looked at his dad, then back at her. "Only if you keep making food like tonight." They all laughed. But Ben's laugh was quieter, more complicated. Later, when Wyatt had gone to bed and the fire had been lit, Ben and Tessa sat on the couch, each holding the last of their tea. "You didn't have to do all that tonight," he said. "Dinner, the candles, the stories." "I didn't have to," she replied. "I wanted to." Ben nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about that knock," he said. "What if I lose him?" "You won't," Tessa said gently. "You're a good father. Anyone can see that. Truth doesn't always win in court. Then we make sure it wins outside of it," she said. "We build something so full of love, of proof, that no one can deny it." Ben turned to her eyes, dark in the firelight. "Why are you helping me?" She paused, then said, "Because someone once asked me not to let grief be the last thing they gave me. And I think helping you is part of honoring that." Ben's eyes dropped. His hands tightened around his mug. "Tessa." She looked at him. "Yeah, if you stay, it won't just be about helping." She held his gaze. "I know." The space between them pulsed, not with urgency but with understanding, with the quiet promise of something real, something neither of them had expected, something earned. Ben stood then, slowly. "I'll check on Wyatt." Tessa nodded, watching him disappear down the hallway. She sat alone for a moment, staring at the glowing embers. There had been many tables in her life, mess halls, debriefing rooms, lonely motel counters. But tonight's table, cluttered with laughter and stories and love, this table was the first that had felt like something she could return to, maybe even belong to. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness. No rain, no wind, just a thick quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Ben stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, eyes fixed on the road beyond the trees. He hadn't slept much. The image of Marion Doyle, the social worker, lingered in his mind. So did the words custody hearing legal counsel concerns for the child's emotional well-being. He sipped his coffee and tried not to imagine a courtroom, tried not to picture Wyatt in a blazer too big for him sitting before strangers who didn't know anything about Lego spaceships or bedtime stories, tried not to wonder what Megan's parents would say, what they'd twist. Behind him, the door creaked open. "You okay?" Tessa's voice was soft, still laced with sleep. Ben didn't turn. "Define okay." She stepped out beside him, wrapped in a sweater, her hair still damp from a quick shower. I'd define it as not spiraling into worst-case scenarios before breakfast. Ben smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I keep asking myself if I did something wrong, he murmured. If I missed something. If I didn't do enough. You did everything she said. He looked at her now. Then why does it feel like it's still not enough? Tessa placed her coffee on the porch rail and stood silently beside him. She knew that feeling too well, how the ghosts of the past crept in through the cracks of even the most solid life. I think she said carefully, "You've been holding on so tightly to make sure nothing falls apart. You forgot how heavy it is." He glanced at her. Maybe it's time to share the weight. Before he could respond, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drew both their gazes toward the road. A sleek silver SUV pulled up to the edge of the driveway. Ben stiffened. The door opened, and a man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out. Mid-60s, stern features, silver hair, combed back posture upright like a soldier. Ted Lockhart, Ben muttered. Her father. Tessa's body went rigid beside him. Wyatt must have heard the car, too. He opened the front door and stepped outside, blinking into the morning light. Ted spotted the boy immediately. Wyatt. The voice was cold, unfamiliar. Wyatt shrank back instinctively. Ben stepped between them. "What do you want?" Ted smiled without warmth. "I wanted to see my grandson. Something I've been denied for too long. You had 4 years. I was grieving." Ben scoffed. "Grieving doesn't make you vanish, and it doesn't give you the right to tear apart the only home this kid has ever known." Tessa moved slightly forward, her presence deliberate. "Maybe this isn't the time or place." Ted looked her up and down. "And you are someone who cares." He turned back to Ben. "This doesn't have to get ugly. We can discuss custody civilly. Supervised visitation. Maybe a structured transition." "There is no transition," Ben said. Voice firm. "He's my son." Megan and I agreed. You were the ones who stepped away. Ted's expression hardened. That wasn't abandonment. It was protection. From what Ben snapped. From love. From a father doing the best he could. Ted didn't answer. Tessa watched. Ben saw his shoulders tense, his breath shorten. She gently touched his arm. "Go inside," she whispered. "I'll handle this." Ben hesitated, then nodded. He turned, took Wyatt's hand, and guided him back into the cabin. Tessa stepped forward. "You have every right to miss your daughter," she said, "and to want a connection with your grandson. But this isn't the way." Ted frowned. "You think you understand this family?" "No," she said. "But I understand pain, and this boy already lost one parent. You tear him away now, and you're not saving anything, you're adding to the wreckage." Ted's jaw worked. "You're military." "Was. Then you know duty." She nodded. "I do. Which is why I'm standing here." A long beat of silence passed. Then Ted reached into his coat pocket and handed her a card. "My attorney's information. We'll proceed formally." Tessa took the card but said nothing. Ted walked back to his car, the quiet hum of the engine soon fading into the trees. She stood there, long after he'd gone, staring at the space he'd occupied. Inside, Ben sat at the kitchen table, Wyatt curled up next to him, head resting against his side. The boy looked small, fragile, trying to be brave. Tessa entered and closed the door behind her. Her expression was unreadable. "Well," Ben asked, "they're not backing down." He nodded once. "I figured. I think it's time to stop hoping they'll just disappear." Ben met her eyes. "What do? We fight," she said. "Together." He looked at her, then really looked at her, as if seeing not just the woman in front of him, but every mile she'd walked to get there. Every wound turned into wisdom. Every guarded silence now filled with purpose. Ben placed his hand on the table, palm open. Tessa stared at it for a second, then placed hers on top of it. Wyatt watched them quietly, and though no words were spoken, he reached up and added his small hand, bridging theirs. In that moment, nothing about them was traditional. Not blood, not vows, not paperwork, but it was family. It was real. The court date was set for 2 weeks from Friday. Ben had spent the better part of the morning on the phone with a local family attorney, while Wyatt sat in the corner drawing pictures of spaceships with shields made out of hearts. Tessa watched from across the room, her thoughts a storm of their own. The house felt tighter now, more fragile, as if the weight of what might happen had crept into the walls and made everything creak. Ben hung up the phone and turned to her. They want character statements, proof of stability, letters from the school board neighbors, anyone who can speak to Wyatt's well-being. You'll have them, she said almost automatically. I know. He sat down slowly at the table, his shoulders heavier than usual. Part of me wants to scream, he admitted. The other part wants to just take Wyatt and disappear into the mountains. You won't, Tessa said. You're not built that way. Ben looked up. How do you know? Because you stayed. The silence that followed was softer this time, like the quiet after a song finishes, and no one wants to move. Tessa took a deep breath. I got a call this morning, she said. Ben raised an eyebrow. From who? The VA office. They're offering me the role. Logistics coordinator. Permanent. Full-time. Not part-time like before. His face stayed neutral, unreadable. That's what you wanted? She nodded. It's good work. Helping veterans, training programs. It's meaningful. But, she hesitated, then said it. It's in Salem. Ben leaned back. That's 3 hours from here. I know. He looked out the window, jaw tight. Tessa spoke gently. I haven't said yes. Ben turned to her, eyes quiet. Because of us. Because of Wyatt, she said first. Because of you. Because this place has given me something I didn't know I needed. Ben stood and walked to the window. I don't want to hold you back, Tessa. You're not. You have a whole life waiting out there. A clean one, with a paycheck and health benefits, and people who don't show up threatening custody battles. She walked over to him slowly. I don't want clean. I want honest. I want real. I want the life that's messy and raw and filled with burnt toast and laughter at the dinner table. And Ben, he turned. If you think I'm choosing between helping veterans and loving you, then you've never understood who I am. The words hung in the air between them. She hadn't said it before, not aloud. Loving you. Ben's eyes darkened, not with pain, but with something else, like a man who had been holding his breath so long he'd forgotten what exhaling felt like. Tessa, he said quietly, there's something I haven't told you. She waited. I wasn't just tired after Megan died. I was broken. I went dark. There were days I left Wyatt with neighbors and just drove. I couldn't look at him without seeing her. Couldn't sleep without hearing her cough. Tessa reached for his hand. He let her. I almost signed him over to her parents. Her eyes widened. They came after the funeral, offered to take him while I figured things out. For 2 days I considered it, had the paperwork in my hands, thought maybe he'd be better off. But you didn't, she said. No, because one night I came home after a long drive, sat in the truck for an hour. When I finally walked in, he was on the floor, holding her old sweater like it was a blanket. He looked at me and said, "You came back." Ben's voice cracked. I realized then I wasn't the broken one. I was just scared, and he was waiting for me to show up. Tessa said nothing. She just held his hand tighter. I'm still scared, he whispered. Every day. So am I, she replied. But the difference now is we don't have to be scared alone. He looked at her, eyes full. I don't want you to leave. She smiled softly. I won't. but the job I can make it work, she said. 2 days remote, 3 days in Salem. We'll find a rhythm. People do it all the time when they have something worth staying close to. And what do you have, you and Wyatt? She said without hesitation. That's home. He pulled her into his arms, not out of passion, not yet, but out of sheer relief, out of the aching comfort that comes when someone finally says the words you've spent years wishing to hear. They stood there for a long time, in the quiet, in the morning light, in the beginning of something they were both terrified to name. Later that evening, Tessa found Wyatt on the porch sketching in his notebook. "Whatcha drawing?" she asked. He flipped it toward her. It was a picture of a little house with trees all around it, and 3 people standing out front. A tall man, a woman with long hair, and a kid with a red cape. "That's us," he said proudly. "But I gave myself a cape." She ruffled his hair. "Why the cape?" He shrugged. "Everyone needs something to help them fly." Tessa blinked away the sting behind her eyes. "You're not wrong," she whispered. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky burned orange and violet, she leaned back on the step beside him, feeling for the first time in years, not like a visitor, not like a soldier, not like someone left behind. She felt like someone who had come home. There were no parades, no grand gestures, no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just the soft creak of the cabin porch beneath 3 sets of footsteps and the quiet hum of the wind moving through the trees like the woods themselves were exhaling. Fall had settled into Maple Hollow. The trees were dressed in burnt orange and gold. The air carried the scent of damp leaves and firewood, and every morning began with the soft hush of frost on the windows. Tessa stood in front of the community center bulletin board, pinning up a flyer for a new veteran transition program. Her name was at the bottom. So was Ben's program director volunteer instructor. It still made her smile. Ben was across the lot helping Wyatt out of the truck. The boy wore a handmade paper crown and carried a poster that read, "My dad is my hero," scrawled in uneven but proud letters. His school had held a Family Heroes Week, and Wyatt hadn't hesitated in his choice. Ben had blushed when he read it. Tessa had cried. Now they were heading toward her, Ben's arm lightly resting on Wyatt's shoulder, and Wyatt's free hand waving the poster like a flag. "I told Mrs. Keene you were a soldier, and that you fix people," Wyatt said, breathlessly looking up at Tessa. "She asked if that meant you were a doctor. I said, 'No, she's better.'" Tessa crouched down to his level. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." He grinned. "It's true." Ben leaned in. He also told them I cry when chopping onions, but conveniently left out the part where I make the best chili in town. Tessa stood. "You brought that on yourself. Too much garlic." He rolled his eyes with mock offense. Together, they stepped inside the community center, where a small gathering of local families and veterans had begun to form. The lights were warm, the tables lined with homemade desserts and paper cups of cider. Tessa had organized the entire event, Welcome Home, a night for those who served, and Maple Hollow had shown up. Tessa took the microphone for a moment, clearing her throat. "I'm not big on speeches," she began, smiling nervously. "But I just wanted to say thank you for showing up, for believing in second chances, for proving that sometimes home isn't a place you go back to, it's something you choose to build forward." Polite applause followed, warm and genuine. She stepped down to find Ben watching her with quiet admiration. "You still nervous in front of crowds?" he asked. "Only when the man I love is watching," she replied. Ben blinked, caught off guard. It was the first time she'd said it. She didn't take it back. He stepped forward, slid his hand into hers. "I've been waiting a long time to hear that." She leaned in. "I know." And just like that, the room faded. The noise, The lights, the buzz of conversation, all of it dulled around the gravity of that moment. It was the kiss that followed, not hurried, not showy, just honest and full, that made someone in the crowd clap, and Wyatt giggle loudly from behind a table of cookies. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the air had cooled, the three of them returned home. Wyatt fell asleep in the truck, his head tilted at an impossible angle, drooling slightly on his hero poster. Tessa carried him inside, while Ben cleaned up in the shed. She found him there later, sitting at the piano. The cover was off, the keys were exposed. He wasn't playing, just sitting, thinking. She walked in quietly and sat beside him. "I remember the first night I found this," she said. "It was raining. You told me you didn't play anymore." He smiled faintly. "I didn't. Not until you." She looked at him. "Play something." He hesitated, then began a soft melody. One hand, then the other. It wasn't polished, but it was honest, fragile and beautiful, and a little broken. Like all the best things, Tessa closed her eyes. She felt the music more than heard it. It wasn't about notes. It was about what rose between them as he played. Peace, belonging, home. When the last note faded into silence, she whispered, "You know what I think, this is what Jared meant." Ben turned to her. "What do you mean?" She reached into her pocket, pulled out the now faded letter, and read aloud. "Kiss someone under a thunderstorm." She looked up. "We didn't have a thunderstorm, but we had the rain, we had the knock at the door, and we had this." Ben nodded. "You're not running anymore." "No," she said. "I'm choosing. And I choose this. I choose us." He took her hand again. No words, just the warmth of fingers interlaced. In the distance, the wind stirred through the trees. The old porch creaked. The scent of firewood drifted in from the open window. And inside the little cabin at the edge of Maple Hollow, three hearts finally beat in rhythm, not with the noise of war or the silence of grief, but with something quieter, something stronger, something like the sound of belonging. Where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Drop a comment below and say hello. Your stories and thoughts mean more than you know. If this story touched your heart and you believe in kindness and healing, and in the quiet beauty of second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share stories just like this, stories that warm the soul and remind us that it's never too late to begin again. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. We're so glad you're here.